All right, so you sent us a whole stack of papers on language, huh? You're really diving deep into how humans make meaning. That's
Mhm.
awesome. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of language acquisition, how our brains handle this complex system, and even what happens when things get a little wibbly-wobbly in our neural wiring.
It's fascinating stuff, and you're right to hone in on that word meaning. What we're really talking about is a uniquely human ability to take abstract thoughts and feelings and encode them into a system of symbols that others can decode.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. So where do we even begin? Our sources seem to agree that this whole language journey starts pretty early on, right? I
Right.
mean, we're not born reciting Shakespeare.
Not quite, although wouldn't that be something? But you're right, the seeds of language are sown much earlier, and they often start with those delightful babbles and coos of infancy.
Right? Like a symphony of vowel sounds. But it's more than just cute gurgling, isn't it?
Absolutely. Those babbles are actually a child's first foray into the world of phonemes, the distinct sounds that make up their native language. They're experimenting, testing out their vocal cords, and starting to pick up on the sounds that hold meaning in their environment.
It's like their little brains are already starting to decode the system, and then come the one-word utterances, the milk and cookie phase. So straightforward, yet so effective.
Deceptively straightforward. Remember, a single word at that stage can convey a whole message. Cookie might mean I want a cookie or look a cookie. It all depends on the context and the child's incredible ability to make themselves understood. But here's where it gets really interesting. Those adorable overextension errors they make. You know, like calling all animals doggy.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
My niece went through a phase where every man with a beard was daddy. It was cute, but also kind of a logistical nightmare at family gatherings.
Exactly. But those errors are more than just amusing anecdotes. They actually reveal a lot about how children are building their understanding of categories and concepts. Studies have shown that kids who overextend more tend to have larger vocabularies later on. It suggests they're actively testing their hypotheses about the world, constantly refining their understanding.
So it's not just a cute mistake, it's a sign of their brains working overtime to make sense of things. That's amazing. But for a long time, the prevailing theory was that language was all about nurture, right? Like
Right.
we're born as blank slates, and it's just a matter of being exposed to enough language input.
Right, that was the behaviorist perspective language, as learned behavior shaped by imitation and reinforcement. But then came along a linguist named Noam Chomsky, and he really shook things up with his theory of innateness.
Ah, yes, Chomsky.
Hmm,
His work is in a few of the papers you sent over. He basically argued that we're born with a kind of blueprint for language already wired into our brains, right?
exactly. He called it the language acquisition device. Or L.E.D. Chomsky argued that children couldn't possibly learn the complexities of grammar simply through imitation, especially given the often messy and inconsistent way adults speak. He proposed that we're born with an innate understanding of the underlying structure of language, a set of universal grammatical rules that help us make sense of the linguistic world around us.
So it's like we have this internal grammar checker that's already up and running from day one.
In a sense, yes, but it's essential to understand that Chomsky's theory has been both incredibly influential and the subject of much debate within linguistics. Some researchers argue for a less rigid view of innateness, emphasizing the crucial role of social interaction and environmental input in shaping language development. They suggest it's more of a dynamic interplay between nature and nurture.
So it's not a simple either-or situation. It's about understanding how these forces work together. That makes sense.
Exactly. But even with these ongoing debates, the case of Jeannie, a child tragically isolated until the age of 13, offers compelling evidence for the importance of early language exposure. Despite intensive efforts to teach her language later in life, she never fully acquired grammatical competence.
That's heartbreaking, but it also highlights just how crucial those early years are for language development.
Mhm.
It seems like there's a window of opportunity, a time when our brains are most receptive to absorbing language's intricacies.
Precisely. While we don't want to minimize the remarkable capacity for learning that persists throughout life, there's something quite unique about the plasticity of the young brain when it comes to language acquisition.
It makes you wonder, though, what's going on in those pre-language brains. If language influences how we think, can babies even think without it? Or is it more of a chicken and egg situation?
The age-old question. And you've hit on a debate that's as fascinating as it is complex, the relationship between language and thought.
Yeah, like we're trying to peek inside a black box, right? We can observe the input, the language a child hears, and the output. They're developing language skills.
Hmm.
But what's happening in between those cognitive processes that are at work, that's the real mystery.
Exactly. And it's a question that has puzzled philosophers and psychologists for centuries. Does the language we speak shape our thoughts, or do our thoughts shape our language? It's likely not a simple one-way street, but rather a complex dance between the two.
So it's not about whether language determines thought, but rather how it influences it. Like maybe it gives us a certain framework for organizing our experiences, but doesn't dictate what those experiences can be.
Precisely. Take the classic example of color perception. Some languages have different words for shades of blue and green that English speakers might lump together. Research suggests that having distinct words for those colors might make it easier for speakers of those languages to discriminate between them.
Interesting. So our language might actually make us more attuned to certain distinctions in the world around us.
Exactly.
Think so.
But on the flip side, we know that pre-linguistic infants and even non-human primates can still perceive those same color differences even without the specific vocabulary.
So it's not like language magically grants us the ability to see those differences, but it might enhance or refine our perception of them.
That's a great way to put it. And it speaks to this idea of language as a tool, a powerful tool that can shape our attention, highlight certain aspects of reality, and even influence how we remember events. But it's not the whole story of how our minds work.
It's like language is one lens through which we view the world, but it's not the only lens.
Precisely. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of this whole discussion. The biological underpinnings of language, our ability to produce and comprehend language, is deeply rooted in the evolution of our brains and vocal tracts.
Oh, right. It's not just about having a big brain. It's about how that brain is wired. And if I remember correctly, there are specific areas of the brain that are particularly important for language processing, right?
You're exactly right. And we have the work of those early neuroscientists like Broca and Wernicke to thank for mapping out those crucial areas. Remember how we talked about Broca's aphasia earlier, that difficulty with language production?
Yeah, it was almost like their internal grammar system was on the fritz, even though they still understood what was being said to them. So what's actually happening in the brain when someone has that type of aphasia?
Well, it often involves damage to a specific area in the left frontal lobe, aptly named Broca's area. This region appears to be crucial for planning and sequencing the motor movements needed for fluent speech.
So it's like the control center for coordinating all those intricate muscle movements that allow us to articulate words and sentences. And what about Wernicke's aphasia? That one seemed even more perplexing. The words flowed, but the meaning got lost along the way.
It's like listening to a grammatically correct word salad, isn't it? Wernicke's aphasia typically involves damage to a different region in the left temporal lobe known as Wernicke's area. This area seems to be essential for semantic processing, for connecting words to their meanings, and for understanding the relationships between words in a sentence.
So Broca's area is like the conductor, making sure all the instruments are playing in sync, while Wernicke's area is like the composer, ensuring the music actually makes sense.
That's a fantastic analogy, and it underscores just how specialized different areas of our brains have become for language processing. But it's important to remember that it's not quite as simple as having two separate areas for language. It's a complex interplay between multiple brain regions all working together in concert.
It's like language is this intricate symphony being orchestrated by our brains with different areas responsible for different aspects of the performance. Amazing.
Absolutely. And it highlights just how remarkable our brains are, not just in their ability to acquire and use language, but also in their remarkable capacity to adapt and compensate when faced with challenges.
It makes you wonder, though, how did our brains evolve to be so specialized for language in the first place?
Yeah.
What was it about our evolutionary journey that made language such a valuable adaptation?
That's a question that has intrigued anthropologists, linguists, and evolutionary biologists for decades. And while there's no single definitive answer, there are some compelling theories out there. One prominent idea is that language evolved as a tool for social cohesion, a way to strengthen bonds within groups and navigate the complexities of social life.
So instead of just grunting and pointing, early humans could actually share complex information, coordinate activities, and pass down knowledge across generations. That makes sense. It would have given them a serious leg up in terms of survival.
Exactly. Imagine trying to hunt a mammoth or build shelter using only gestures and grunts. Language would have facilitated cooperation planning and the transmission of vital skills.
It's like language became this incredible tool for collective problem solving, for sharing knowledge, and building a shared understanding of the world.
Precisely. And as our social structures became more complex, so too did our language. We needed ways to express abstract ideas, to talk about things that weren't physically present, and to navigate the nuances of social hierarchies and relationships.
It's like language co-evolved with our social brains, each driving the other to new levels of complexity. That's fascinating. But here's a question that's been bugging me. If language is so deeply rooted in our evolutionary history, shouldn't we see at least some hints of it in other species, especially our closest primate relatives?
Ah, yes. The quest to find the missing link in language evolution. It's a question that has fueled countless research projects with scientists trying to teach chimpanzees sign language or to communicate using symbols.
Right, I remember reading about those studies. Didn't they have some limited success?
Yes, but with important caveats. While chimps can learn to associate symbols with objects or actions and even string together short sequences, their communication lacks the key features of human language, the complex grammar, the open-ended creativity, and the ability to refer to abstract concepts or events displaced in time.
So it seems like there's something unique about the human brain, something that allows us to take those basic building blocks of communication and create something truly extraordinary.
Exactly. And while the jury is still out on exactly what that something is, many researchers believe it has to do with the specific wiring of our brains, particularly in those specialized language areas we talked about earlier.
It's like we have this innate capacity for language, this
Yeah.
potential that's just waiting to be unlocked through exposure and interaction.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the remarkable process of language acquisition, to those early years when our brains are like sponges soaking up language from our environment.
So we've got this biological predisposition for language, this incredible brain wiring, but it's the interaction with our environment, especially in those early years, that really sets the stage.
Exactly. Think of it like a dance between nature and nurture. We come pre-programmed with certain linguistic capabilities, but it's the exposure to language in our environment, the constant interaction with caregivers, siblings, and the wider world that shapes those abilities into the nuanced and sophisticated communication system we know as language.
It's like we're born with the musical instrument, but it takes practice, feedback, and a whole lot of listening to learn how to play it beautifully.
What a fantastic analogy. And just like learning an instrument, the more you immerse yourself in the world of language, the more proficient you become. That brings us to something you touched on earlier, and it's a topic that always gets me excited: multilingualism.
Oh, right. We were talking about those individuals who can effortlessly switch between languages, those linguistic chameleons. It's always blown my mind. Is there something fundamentally different about their brains, or is it more about the learning process?
That's a question that researchers are still trying to unravel, but what we do know is that the multilingual brain is a fascinating example of neural plasticity and adaptation.
So it's like their brains have become masters at juggling multiple linguistic systems, each with its own set of rules and nuances. But how does that actually work? I mean, do they have separate compartments for each language, or is it more integrated?
That's where things get really interesting. Researchers have been using brain imaging techniques like fMRI to try and pinpoint where different languages live in the brain.
And what have they found? Is it like having a linguistic filing cabinet with neatly labeled drawers for each language?
Well, not quite. The picture is far more complex and interconnected than that. While there's some evidence for regional specialization, meaning certain areas might be more active when processing one language versus another, it's not as if each language gets its own dedicated neural real estate.
So it's more about how different brain networks, even those involved in other cognitive tasks, are recruited and coordinated during language processing.
Exactly. It's like having a team of expert chefs in a kitchen, each with their own specialty, but they can seamlessly work together to create a multi-course meal drawing on shared resources and adapting to different culinary traditions.
That's a delicious analogy. And just like a school chef can switch between recipes, a multilingual individual can switch between languages, drawing on their shared linguistic knowledge and adapting to the specific demands of the situation.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if those cognitive benefits we often hear about, like improved multitasking or better attention control, come from all that mental juggling.
That's what many researchers believe. The idea is that constantly navigating between languages acts like a kind of cognitive workout, strengthening those executive function skills, those mental muscles that help us plan switch tasks and ignore distractions.
It's like giving your brain a mental workout, building up those cognitive muscles. But I'm curious, are there different ways to be multilingual? Does it matter if you learn languages simultaneously or sequentially, or even if you're equally fluent in all of them?
Those are all excellent questions, and they point to the incredible diversity within multilingualism. It's not a one-size-fits-all phenomenon. Some individuals grow up speaking multiple languages from birth, while others acquire them later in life. Some achieve native-like fluency in all their languages, while others might be more comfortable in certain domains or contexts.
So it's not just about how many languages you speak, it's about your personal history
Yeah,
with those languages, the context in which you use them, and even your emotional connection to them.
absolutely. Language is so intertwined with our identities, our cultures, and our sense of self. And for multilingual individuals, that connection is amplified, multifaceted, and constantly evolving.
It's like their linguistic tapestry is woven from threads of different colors and textures, creating a rich and intricate pattern that reflects their unique life experiences.
What a beautiful way to put it. And just like a tapestry, language can be both incredibly resilient and surprisingly fragile. We've talked about the remarkable plasticity of the brain, its ability to adapt and rewire itself, but we've also seen how vulnerable language can be to injury or disruption.
Right. With those language disorders we discussed earlier, aphasia, where brain damage can lead to difficulties producing or understanding language, and those speech disorders that affect the physical production of sounds, it's a stark reminder that this ability we often take for granted is actually quite precious and delicately balanced.
It is indeed. And it speaks to the importance of early intervention for children with language delays or disorders, as well as the ongoing support and rehabilitation for those who have experienced language loss due to stroke or other neurological conditions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because language is more than just a tool for communication. It's fundamental to how we connect with the world, how we build relationships, express our creativity, and navigate the complexities of human experience.
It's so true. And it's a field that continues to evolve and surprise us with each new study shedding light on the intricate workings of the human brain and the extraordinary power of language.
Well, we've certainly delved into the depths of this fascinating topic today. From those early babbles of infancy to the intricate neural networks that make language possible, from the challenges of language disorders to the cognitive benefits of multilingualism. We've explored the many facets of this uniquely human ability. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought the next time you find yourself effortlessly crafting a sentence, deciphering a complex text, or simply engaging in a meaningful conversation. Take a moment to appreciate the incredible symphony of cognitive processes happening within your brain. It's a truly remarkable feat, one that continues to fascinate and inspire researchers and language enthusiasts alike. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those conversations flowing.